Today is March the 20th, 2013. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And today I'm in Norman, Oklahoma, speaking with Dr. Chris Fiebrich, right, at the National Weather Center. And we're going to be discussing the Mesonet, but first we're going to get to know him a little bit. So could you tell us when and where you were born, and then we'll work our way forward.
Okay. I was born in Bastrop, Texas, October 14th, 1974, and grew up in Bastrop. It's a town about 30 miles southeast of Austin, and grew up there, went to school there, high school there. In high school, or beginning in junior high, I got really interested in weather and had the local weatherman for Austin come talk to my school. And that was real exciting. And then kept in touch with him, and he kind of mentored me through high school. And I did a science fair project in high school where I set up a network of weather stations, 16 of them around Bastrop, to look at how, rainfall and temperatures and things like that vary just over a very small area. And made it to the state science fair and was all excited. And then graduated high school in '93, and OU was really the top meteorology school anywhere. It was a big step to leave Texas. I have a big family down there, and no one had ever, left the state. But my parents finally allowed me to do that. Come to OU for 4 years, and my sophomore year would have been in 1994. Saw a job posting for this thing called the Mesonet that was getting going, and they were looking for a student. And reading it, it was just really my dream job. Exactly the kind of thing I had always been interested in, taking weather reports. And so, in high school, like I said, I had 16 places I took the weather at. This was now this new network in Oklahoma that was going to be automatically recording weather variables across the state. And so, very excited, I applied for that. And I was one of the first student operators at the Mesonet back then in 1994. That's how
20 years ago.
How it came to be here, yeah. And it's been a really good place to work. I got my bachelor's degree at OU. I took 1 year off to go do an internship at National Weather Service headquarters in Washington, D.C., before I got my undergrad degree. And when I came back, the director of the climate survey, Dr. Ken Crawford, who's along with Ron Elliott at OSU, they were kind of the fathers of the Oklahoma Mesonet that got everything started in the late 80s and early 90s. And he came out to Washington, D.C. and saw me one time. He was doing other business out there. And we talked about when I came back to OU, and I came back and finished my undergrad and was the quality assurance meteorologist at the Mesonet then. So I worked on looking at the data quality of all the sites reporting, and I did that, and I did my master's thesis on the quality assurance of the Oklahoma Mesonet. One thing I'm really proud of with that is that there's a journal, the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, which goes out to all the members of the American Meteorological Society in the nation. And with my thesis, we made the cover of that magazine, that monthly magazine, with the Mesonet on there. And I was very proud of that, and working with Dr. Crawford as my advisor. And so I continued in quality assurance with the network. And I believe about 2001, the position for manager of the Mesonet was vacant when Scott Richardson moved to Penn State. And so I became the manager of the network in 2001, 2002. And so I've got to work with all aspects of the network since then.
It's pushing 12 years, huh?
Yeah.
And it was your dream job from the
Yes, really it is. And that's kind of a lot of the staff we have at the Mesonet are, not all of them are meteorologists, but they're all very interested in weather. And to have the ability to, I look back to like high school when there's a thunderstorm moving towards us, and I had no idea what the radar looked like. I mean, there was no way to view any of that. You just kind of could hear that there was a warning coming out, but you didn't know, is it heading to the southern part of the county or straight for you, what the shape of the storm looks like, does it have a hook on it, does it have an intense part, or is it decaying, or is it developing? You just had no idea any of that stuff. And then even starting in college at OU, you'd get a forecast of a cold front coming, but you really didn't know how fast it was moving, what time it would occur. And so with the Mesonet, giving you that every 5 minutes of data from everywhere across the state, and we're lucky that we're kind of central part of the state, so we have, we can see to the west, to the north, to the east, to the south. That really just sparked a lot of interest in the students in meteorology at that time. Like I mentioned, starting out as a freshman at OU, we could know, oh, the front just passed Wichita. But there wasn't really anything between Wichita and Oklahoma City in terms of observing stations to tell you, what's going on. Now with the Mesonet, and back in the early days, it was kind of clunky to download this data and try to view it, but you could see, wow, the winds just gusted to 40 miles an hour, in Guthrie, or the temperature just dropped 10 degrees in 5 minutes, or that kind of thing. It just really gave us so much new data to look at, like I said, wind gusts, rainfall rates, temperature drops, all that kind of stuff. And it was a very exciting time to be a meteorology student and to have all that new data coming online.
Quality assurance, is that what?
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, one of the things that really sets the Mesonet apart from any other network is the quality. And Ken Crawford, Ron Elliott, and Dr. Fred Brock, they knew in the early days they wanted this data to be trusted. And so quality was kind of a priority. This lab we're setting in, most networks don't have this kind of stuff. When we buy a sensor brand new, we calibrate it in these chambers to make sure it actually performs as the manufacturer said it would. So, and we find, we've got 120 stations, we've got thousands of sensors. There are definitely sensors that are brand new that do not perform well through the entire range. And for instance, like a relative humidity sensor, for instance, the manufacturer may say, yes, it's within 3% at 50% relative humidity and at room temperature. But we'll test it from 0 all the way to 100% in these chambers. We'll test it over varying temperatures that we would expect out in the state. And sure enough, we'll find, when it's really cold or when it's really, really dry or when it's really moist, a particular sensor may not be as accurate as we need it to be. So we can cull those out and make sure that we're putting out quality sensors. And then every sensor in the network is periodically rotated back into this calibration lab. So with 3,000 to 4,000 sensors out across the state, we've got to keep track of the age of every single sensor at every single site, because of course they didn't all go out on the same day. It took, setting up the network took 1 to 2 years to get all the stations deployed. And then as we, need to replace sensors or sensors fail, today some sensor in the network's going to fail. And that's what quality assurance is doing, is looking at all the data, identifying what stations or what sensors have either drifted out of tolerance or just completely failed. Maybe a gopher choose a soil temperature sensor today, and that data now is erroneous, or a hail hits an anemometer, or just the age of some cable gets to where moisture from the soil is causing a bias in it. We've been doing this for 20 years, and we still every year find new things that can cause problems to our sensors. And we've learned a lot. We've learned to recognize a lot of common problems, but it never fails that there's stuff we've never seen before, in 20 years that can cause the data quality to not be good. And so, again, what really sets us apart and was a priority from the very beginning was trying to have research quality data, calibrate every sensor, quality assure the data. And for instance, if a rain event happens and one of our gauges is clogged with maybe dust or leaves or anything. I mean, these stations are out in the middle of a farmer's pasture. That's kind of our ideal location. We want them to be away from roads and away from buildings and away from people. Out in the middle of a pasture is kind of perfect. Anything can happen over time, especially with as far apart sometimes our rain events are. The rain gauges can fill up with things. There are screens and a lot of things to try to prevent that from occurring, but you never know what's going to happen. And so every time it rains, we'll quality assure every single gauge, compare it to what the radar estimated. We have all kinds of techniques that we've developed to verify the quality of the data. And then if, for instance, say the Stillwater rain gauge reported a 1/2 inch, but we know radar estimated it to be closer to 1 inch, and that Marina and Perkins were closer to 1 inch and they agreed with the radar, our tech would go out, do a test of the gauge. If it's found to not be working properly, then we'll flag the data in the archive so that 10 years from now, no one accidentally downloads Stillwater's rainfall data and think, well, it didn't rain, or they only got a 1/2 inch. We put a lot of effort into going back and trying to make the archive completely clean. And that ends up making holes in the data sometimes. For instance, if Stillwater's rain gauge were found to be a problem, we'd flag all that data as bad. And we'll never know exactly what the rainfall was there. We won't go and estimate it. That's also kind of a fundamental thing that was done at the very beginning, is that we'll never change data. We won't estimate it. We'll flag it as bad if we don't think it has the quality we need. And fortunately, with the Mesonet, we've got 120 stations. So if Stillwater's missing its rain for an event, the user can look at some of the other Payne County sites and get a good idea. But really, there's no way to accurately guess what the rain should have been at Stillwater, so.
That gopher really does chew through things?
Oh, yes.
Really?
We have probably in 20 years, I would guess hundreds of instances of that. Anything underground, soil temperature, soil moisture sensors, things above lightning strikes. We get maybe 10 to 20 lightning strikes hit our sites each year out of our 120 stations. So it's not unusual for a lightning strike to hit a site, blow apart some sensors. We have lightning rods on all of our stations, and that just kind of helps direct the lightning away from some of the more expensive sensors on the station, but it typically will take out some of the sensors. We just any kind of critter that's out there that can get into the site and either burrow or chew or build a nest or something. We have cattle panel fences all around most all of our sites. Stillwater actually is unique because it's a research farm, and we wanted to keep that completely open. There aren't cattle or anything, but we have sites that bulls will knock down the fence and get in and disturb the site too. So just a part of having any piece of equipment out in the Oklahoma landscape for 20 years through winters and summers and dust storms and hailstorms and everything.
One or two people do manage all of that?
For quality assurance, we do have one or two people. Currently, it's one full-time master's level student or master's level employee that does it. And we have a lot of tools. Throughout the day, we have about 20 tests that as the data comes in every 5 minutes, these algorithms test the data. They say, for instance, Stillwater, maybe it reports 60 degrees right now. They say, is that within the climatological range for Stillwater? Is that within the range of the sensor's ability to measure? They'll say, did Stillwater change very much from the last 5 minutes? Because we know how fast temperature can change in 5 minutes. And if Stillwater were to change more than, say, 10 Celsius, we know that could be erroneous. We can say, we know how much Stillwater's temperature should move. It shouldn't stay the same for more than X number of minutes. Just a whole lot of techniques we've developed, and we've become the leader in quality assurance of meteorological data also. And we had been developing so many techniques, and we had this stack in our office that we called the QA Bible of every single paper that had ever been published on quality assurance. And so many people had asked us, we've worked with dozens of other networks, and they've said, how do you do the quality control? Can you give us the quality control? And it's not something you can just hand to someone. It's not it's not on a CD that you just run. It's a whole bunch of techniques, manual techniques, automated techniques, databases, and things like that. And in 2010, I believe, we wrote a manuscript for the Journal of Atmospheric and Oceanic Technology that reviewed over 100 papers on quality assurance of meteorological data. And it was titled Quality Assurance Procedures of Mesoscale Meteorological Data, to kind of, now we can hand, the Kentucky Mesonet, here's everything we know, and all the techniques we use, and all the things that other networks around the country are using to document that. That was a big accomplishment. It took us a lot of years to finally put that paper together and get it published.
You'd be selling it instead of giving it out.
Yeah, and we've had our policy has just basically been, since we're a university, we're state funded, we've always just, anytime someone wants help, we try to do whatever we can. We had hosted so many other states and countries coming to our facility to see how we had set up the Mesonet, that finally in 2002, we decided to have a conference, put on a conference, which was very ambitious. It's been over 10 years, and I don't ever want to even think about doing that again, but we talk about it every now and then, doing another one since it's been so long. But, the full thing of getting, sending out information about it to the community, getting people to register, hotels, getting chairpersons for each session, having the talks, having poster session, it was a big job. And, the American Meteorological Society does this all the time. They're good at it because they put them on all throughout the year. But anyway, we brought together in 2002, we called it Mesonet 2002, and we did it in Oklahoma City. And we had about 25 states and countries come to learn about how we had put the Mesonet together. So rather than each group kind of coming and saying, hey, can we come to the Mesonet for a week and just look at what you're doing and talk to you, we tried to get everybody, a lot of people here at one time to kind of discuss these issues.
It was a success, though, then, if you had that many.
It was. And we still get visitors for sure. Just a month or two ago, we had a group from Korea come to learn about our quality assurance and how we do that. I wanted to sit down with our quality assurance meteorologist and just watch her do her job and see what kind of tools she was using. They went out with one of our field technicians to see how he maintained the site and tested the sensors. So we've worked with a lot of different states and countries to try to help them get off the ground. We're looked at as the gold standard, as kind of the longest living Mesonet. It was a big accomplishment of Dr. Ken Crawford and Dr. Ron Elliott in the early days to get that initial funding to put the network out across the state. That's the first hurdle for another state to do what we've done. And then the second is to get that continued maintenance support to keep things operating. That's actually harder than getting the initial funding, to deploy, getting the continued funding to keep it going year after year.
Is that part of your responsibilities now?
Well, it's our short answer, yes. We get a portion of our funding from the state legislature. About 2/3 of that, of our operating costs come from the state legislature. And we are so grateful that Oklahoma is a really weather-conscious state, and the state legislature has just been very supportive. Now, the state's had bad budget years, of course. They come in cycles, and we're kind of coming out of one now where there were cuts to all agencies, all universities, everything. So sometimes we're very active at the Capitol trying to make sure that our support is going to keep coming. And our director, Kevin Clazel, is the one who primarily goes to the Capitol and works with legislators and people working on the budget and things like that. What we do back here at the office, we have outreach to a number of different groups. We have about 9 or 10 teams under the Mesonet. One of them handles all the calibrations and quality assurance. Another team does all the site maintenance. So they're the field technicians that are going out all across the state every day, taking care of sites, whether that be just maintaining them or fixing problems. Like I said, there's always something breaking. We always have a list of sensor problems across the network that they're taking care of, and they're doing their tests and their rotations that are prescribed throughout the year. Then we have a team that does all of our web development, because we learned early on that if we don't have users and fans, then the legislature won't care about funding us. And so we have a team that's developing websites and iPhone apps and Android apps and things like that to get the data to the user. And then we have a team that does outreach to emergency managers through our OK First program. Another team that does outreach to K through 12 teachers. Another team that does outreach to ag producers. Another one that does it to fire managers. And so I get to work with all those teams. And, the goal is getting fans, getting users out across all of Oklahoma 77 counties that use the data. That's really what is most important to all of the staff here, is having the data make a difference in the state. When we hear that a pecan grower is able to use the Mesonet to know when to apply, some fungicide, or knowing that an emergency manager was able to make a decision for their community based off the Mesonet data to sound the siren, or teachers getting the Mesonet data in their classroom to help them explain science and math topics. Because that works if you have data from their local region. You know what I mean? If there's a teacher out in, Broken Bow that can look at the data every 5 minutes right there for Broken Bow and see how the cold front or the dry line or the rainfall or the wind gusts or the soil moisture is all relating to stuff they're learning, it's been very successful. And the K through 12 actually was our very first outreach. Ken Crawford knew he needed to get kind of grassroots support, and he knew that there were teachers everywhere across the state. And so we started working with teachers. We put computers in their classrooms where they could access the Mesonet data. And, then when we had the teachers going to their legislators and saying, hey, this is really helping us out here in rural Oklahoma, we've got a computer, we're able to show weather data, it helped build that support. So that was in '92, before the network was even fully operational. They started kind of making up what the data would look like for teachers, so how they could use it. And so to date, we've had 400 or 500 teachers we've worked with through workshops and getting them set up to use the Mesonet in their classroom. And then when it came to around 1996, we had confidence working with the teachers. We decided to do formal outreach to emergency managers. And we've now trained over 500 emergency managers in the state. Just this week, we had, on Monday and Tuesday of this week, we had emergency managers upstairs for a 2-day course. Last week, we had a 4-day course for emergency managers. That's through the Mesonet's OK First program. Again, it was started in 1996, and the goal of that is there were, in the mid-90s, emergency managers didn't have access to a lot of the weather data. The radar data wasn't free. They didn't have computers to get that type of information. And so again, we started putting the computers in their offices and train them on how to interpret the radar data. Even though radar is not something the Mesonet measures ourselves, but the radar data coupled with the Mesonet data so that they can see from their local county, or the county north or west of them, where the cold front is, where the freezing line is, where the wind gust is, how much rain is falling out of that storm they see on radar in the county, next to them. Helping them and get access to all the weather data so that they can make decisions for their community has been extremely successful. And like I said, we've got a very active group of emergency managers. We're constantly retraining them, recertifying them, and adding new ones to it. And they've been very, very helpful to us at the state legislature also.
It builds on itself.
Yeah. And so I've asked Dr. Brock before if, he ever thought of all the uses. And they brainstormed, they came up with lots of uses, but we've still been surprised every year at new uses for the data. Electric utilities, the electric co-ops in the state have found great use of it. They can determine, when to turn on a new generator or not, or wait. If they see a temperature shift coming through, well, maybe they can save tens of thousands of dollars by not turning on that next generator, knowing that, use might go down. They've also learned that they can actually push more power through the lines if winds are higher, so it can dissipate some of the heat off the line. And so they can look at kind of regional areas and make better use of some of the electric production decisions they have to make. Lots of models, of course, for farmers and ranchers that we work with OSU on. The scientists at Stillwater come up with, they know that weather impacts peanuts or pecans or grapes, alfalfa, the alfalfa weevil, whether it's insects or diseases or anything like that. A lot of that's dependent on weather variables, the humidity or the temperature or things like that. And so the scientists at Stillwater will develop a model that we can then operate here at the Mesonet and produce on our website every 5 minutes, using with their research to help those farmers and producers make decisions in their county. So just lots of, and we're always trying to come up with, help new decision makers in the state, give Oklahoma an edge over maybe a grape farmer in Texas or Kansas, because we're state funded and we want to help the state save money. So we get about 2/3 of our funding from the state, and then the other third we get through various grants and contracts each year to do everything we need to do to operate the network.
So how many staff do we have today?
We have about 30 full-time staff, and then we get about 10 to 15 students from the university too that are very, very helpful. And if you talk to the 30 staff, I'd say at least 75% of them started off as a student in the Mesonet. We're doing a lot of things that you don't necessarily get trained to do in college specifically, and there aren't a lot of jobs of calibrating sensors or, testing sensors out in the field or doing quality assurance or, so a lot of the people that have worked here have started as students and learned these different skills. And then as the Mesonet's grown, our staff have grown also. And like I said, it's, we really have a diverse portfolio of activities. Like the K-12 outreach, that's one person. I said it's a team, it's a full-time person and a student, but there's a lot of schools across the state that person, wants to try to host field trips through the Weather Center or go to those schools and help with science fairs or things like that. So we're just doing a whole lot of different things. Our biggest group is our software development. And when you think about, iPhone apps, Android apps, websites for farmers versus websites for firefighters versus websites for, the general public, there's a whole lot of technology, and that is a very challenging aspect. We know we have to deliver the data for it to be useful. I mean, otherwise, no reason to do what we're doing unless somebody out there is able to use it. But with kind of the explosion of different web browsers, operating systems, Mac, Windows, Linux, different browsers, Internet Explorer, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, then different phones, then different tablets, iPads, and this and that. It's just a constantly changing environment of things that you have to make your data be viewable on. And we've always, just since we've had such a diverse group of customers, just emergency managers, for instance, some of them across the state have big emergency operations center with all kinds of technology, and others have maybe just one 10-year-old computer, to do what they need to do for their community. So we can't just say we're only going to cater to the latest operating system or the latest phone. And so we've got about 8 to 10 staff that are just helping with the technology thing and making our website work on this new browser or this new operating system, or developing this new app for this new phone that's catching on, and that's always changing.
A third. That's
yeah.
A third.
We have over 50 web servers because we have about 60,000 unique visitors to our website each month. And so we've got to have it kind of, I believe it's 8 different, I'm a meteorologist, I'm not a soft IT expert, but so that things can load balance themselves for if we get, say a storm is moving through Oklahoma City, we may get thousands of people all trying to hit our web server at the exact moment and trying to load balance that so people can see what they need to see is a challenge too. And we want to keep growing that. I mean, and we want to keep more and more people finding the utility of the Mesonet. So it takes a big system of servers to deliver that updated every 5 minutes.
It's a long way from your science project,
Yes.
isn't it?
All on paper back then.
Well, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of classes would you take for this quality assurance in your program? I mean, I'm sure some probably math of some kind.
Yeah, it takes an interest in mesoscale weather, which is its own. Meteorology is surprisingly diverse. We've got people in this building that are just radar. We've got others that are numerical weather prediction modelers. We've got others that are cloud physics people. We've got synoptic scale forecasting types, mesoscale meteor, and then there's severe storms and tropical, and it's very diverse, and each of those different segments of meteorology could fill your entire career, just that small, just that part of meteorology. And mesoscale meteorology, I think, is one of the key things for working at the Mesonet, just having an interest in how variable weather is on the mesoscale, your county versus the county next to you. We saw two years ago, one of our sites hit minus 31 Fahrenheit, which set a new state record for lowest temperature ever recorded in Oklahoma history. And it was at Nowata, up in the northeast part of the state. And really, that type of small-scale weather is a factor of lots of mesoscale things. How deep is the snow? What's the radiational cooling happening? Have the winds calmed right there at that location? A lot of things come together to make unique mesoscale weather happen. And I'm sure you can understand rainfall. I mean, from one county to the next, or from Stillwater to Marina to Perkins, one might get none, another might get 2 or 3 inches. And so having an interest in how mesoscale weather data is, just being kind of excited by that. We can see when a storm is coming through, the pressure will change in advance of it, the pressure will change behind it. These are all mesoscale perturbations of the atmosphere that look bad, actually. If you were to plot a map of it, you'd say, well, the barometer is broken. But then you look at the time series of it and you look at the radar and you see where it was in relation to the echo on the radar. And we learn all kinds of things that there have been a number of field experiments where they put out a bunch of stations. Oklahoma, our Mesonet, is just sitting there for 20 years, hopefully forever. It's a perfect, grid to look at things in advance and behind systems, or to verify models, or to verify how the atmosphere works. We have this really dense network of this data, and having an interest in that is really good. And a lot of that isn't necessarily focused on in meteorology curriculum, but that's what gets people interested in weather, I think.
Well, negative 31, did you go see if the machine was working correctly?
Yes, actually we got out there the next day and brought the sensor back to that chamber and tested it down to minus 40 to make sure that it was good. And we actually had never tested a sensor below minus 30. We never thought that would ever happen. And it tested great. The National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina, deemed it to be the official state record for Oklahoma. So our Mesonet site now carries that. Now, has it ever gotten to minus 31 in Oklahoma? Possibly. We didn't have 120 stations across the state recording every 5 minutes to know. But it's never been recorded until our Mesonet did it. And it was a very special setup of, cold air, snow cover, light winds, perfect radiational cooling to make that very low temperature occur.
And that makes for an exciting day.
Yes, very exciting. Very, very exciting. Everybody's, jumping around and trying to collect data and trying to get out to the site, trying to call the landowner, make sure everything looks good, and bring the sensor back. We're all waiting for it to be calibrated, see how it does. And then, of course, trying to get that on Facebook and getting it out in the media. Because, again, there are so many people that don't even know that the Mesonet exists in the state. And we would love for everyone to know that it's there as a resource, but it's hard to market that. And so that's a constant goal, is just to get more people informed that we have it here for them for free.
When you bring it back to calibrate, you leave one in its place?
Yes, yeah. Yes, so it was swapped out with a different one. So our technicians, there's a cabinet of field-ready sensors that have been calibrated and ready to go out to a site. And they take those, and when they replace a sensor, they bring the sensor back, and it gets tested in the lab to see how it performed. So kind of that comprehensive quality control or quality assurance includes even, I mentioned that we rotate our sensors. Every sensor is on a different schedule, like a relative humidity sensor has to come back to the lab every 18 months, whereas maybe a barometer only has to come back every 48 months. And so we're keeping track of the age of every sensor at every site. And so next month there will be a whole set of sensors across the state that are due for rotation. And we'll actually look several months in advance so that as we go out to parts of the state, if there's a sensor getting ready to be rotated, we'll incorporate that on that visit.
Save a trip, maybe?
Save a trip, definitely. Constantly trying to, believe it or not, to a site and back is on average 200 miles. So, anytime you can hit multiple sites. And now our technicians are also visiting local county educators through OSU's County Extension Service. They used to be called county extension agents, but now they're county educators, stopping off at those places that are near our sites and making sure that they, are familiar with our website, know how to get the data and help maybe the local farmers use the data with that too. So since they're already out there, trying to help them do some marketing for us too, and leave them a card in case they ever have a question, they can call us.
This schedule is probably in a program now.
Yes.
Instead of doing by hand too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
These flags just automatically comes up, or
right. Throughout the day, every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes we're sitting here. All 120 sites are reporting to this building. They're doing that through the Oklahoma Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, OLETs. So each remote station is transmitting to the nearest police or sheriff's office through VHF radio. And that's kind of the wireless. It's the old VHF technology, but we don't need, a telephone line out to the site to communicate. It's all wireless. So it transmits from the site to the nearest sheriff's or police office, gets on OLETs, which is our state's law enforcement telecommunications system. We're set up like an OLETs base here in the building on the 3rd floor, just like as if we were a police station. It's the way police and sheriff can communicate with each other. And so we can communicate to any of those offices through this OLETs network. And it's very quick. Kenton, all the way out, probably 5-6 hours away. Within seconds, we can transmit to Kenton and ask it to maybe send us some data it missed, sending last hour, or turn on 1-minute data collection if something really unique just passed through the site, and it'll transmit it all within a second. We've got it back here within a few seconds. And so throughout the day, as that data comes in, it's being run through about 20 or so algorithms. And if it fails any of those, it alerts our quality assurance meteorologist. And it's probably 50-50 chance of it being something normal that just the weird Oklahoma weather has done that we've never seen happen before, or it is a real problem that, a lightning strike just hit it, or something chewed through a cable, or the rain is falling. The radar says it's falling, but the gauge isn't tipping. It must be clogged or stuck or a spider. Our tipping bucket rain gauges, they tip back and forth as the rain falls through them. If it's been a month or so since it's rained, sometimes a spider will get in there and web up all of the mechanics of it to prevent it from tipping. Mm-hmm. So we'll be notified throughout the day if it fails some of those checks. Then at the end of the day, our quality assurance software tests the entire day's worth of data. Actually, it does it for the last 60 days. Every day, it tests the last 60 days worth of data, because maybe a observation didn't make it into our archive in real time. For instance, maybe a sheriff's office lost power and our repeater or our base couldn't communicate there, or just poor communications of VHF radios. VHF transmissions are affected by weather conditions, and most of the time if it's really, really dry, it's hard to transmit. There isn't as much density of the air to carry that radio signal. And so sometimes we'll have poor communications with stations where we'll miss some observations. And so when those come in, they're typically within a few days, but we just reprocess everything to make sure we're constantly testing all the data in the archive. It's redundant, but it also gives us a chance for, say, if today we determine that the Stillwater rain gauge is not working properly, well, we might go back and then look really closely and say, well, 4 weeks ago it rained at Stillwater and the gauge said 1 inch, but maybe we're suspicious of that now too, knowing that it was found to be clogged. So we might actually flag the data back 4 weeks, and then that next day that'll get all removed from the archive and flagged because we'll reprocess the last 60 days. And so it helps us. A lot of times we'll detect biases that are very slight. For instance, maybe a 0.5 degree on a temperature, or 5% on relative humidity. Once we finally say, yes, this is a problem, we might then go back and say, let's go ahead and flag back 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. We'll try to trace when it looked like that might have developed. And those slow drift of sensors are really hard to do, or hard to determine exactly a start date. So we'll be cautious and go ahead and flag, maybe a month of data. And then we know that by manually flagging it as bad, it'll all get reprocessed, and that will no longer show up on our website or in our products or in our models and things like that. And so that's why it's constantly rerunning 60 days. And then those are automated. Then there are a number of manual techniques where, like I said, we'll compare the radar estimates to the rainfall observations. That's all very manual. There's no way to automate that. Some rain events, the radar will be hot and overestimate everywhere across the state. Other times it will be cold and underestimate everywhere. And it takes a human meteorologist to look at it and say, well, all of these sites, on the south side of the radar reported less than the radar, but they all, did in the same magnitude, so it's probably fine. Then we do different techniques, double mass analysis, statistical techniques to look at longer terms of data. And then each month we'll do monthly QA where we'll average all the temperatures at 1 p.m., or average the maximum RH for the entire month at every site, and look to identify drift or bias in sensors that way. So there's a whole tool bag of things we do to try to constantly keep the data as high a quality as possible. When we deliver data to a user, we'll say that the data quality is frequently reassessed, because I can't promise you that 10 years from now we might not go back to 2013's data and say we don't trust that temperature from X site, based on a new technique we develop. So we can always reassess the quality and maybe flag it down the road.
Lots to go on in there.
and the reason is because like I said, the number of users keeps expanding, and so maybe to a K through 12 teacher, the fact that the RH was off 10% may not be a big deal, but maybe to a firefighter, that would be the difference between saying, yes, you can do that prescribed burn, or no, you should not do that prescribed burn. Conditions, may be sensitive, or for I'm thinking we have a model peanut leaf spot that looks at infection hours on that plant, at high humidity. That difference, that error may negatively impact that. So we've got to just always be very, very conservative. And anytime we think there's any drift or bias or error, flag it as bad, because we don't know what somebody's going to use it down the road. Can you imagine if our temperature data was 1 degree off, and then 10 years from now they're doing a climate change, assessment, when we're looking at tenths of a degree Celsius changes in climate, things like that. So we're just always trying to make sure that the archive is research quality.
Global warming.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no typical day, does it sound like?
No,
No.
not that I've seen in my 10 plus years here. Actually, 20 as a student. So it's always evolving.
A challenge.
Yes.
And have to be forward thinking and stay ahead of the curve a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
Go back to school and learn more.
Yeah. They're coming out with, I mean, the field of meteorology is, they're developing new radars that are now dual pole and give you all kinds of more information about the particles falling, the precipitation type, and things like that. There are more and more types of sensors coming on the market. Some people are wanting to measure things like methane gas and, fluxes of moisture and things like that.
So you add new variables very seldom
Sometimes.
and don't drop off old
Right,
ones.
exactly. Right. Soil moisture is the perfect example. In the early days of the Mesonet, that was not part of the Mesonet. Now we measure soil moisture at almost every site. Over 100 of the 120 have soil moisture sensors. And, it's obvious how that helps farmer and ranchers, but then we started learning, and that was the original reason in 1996 we started adding soil moisture sensors at some sites. But then we started realizing how that moisture flux out of the soils may trigger a thunderstorm to develop, and that land atmosphere interaction is something relatively new in the last 15 years or so, understanding how, moisture of the soil can influence the temperature or the relative humidity or things like that.
Well, I understand you've added some sites and taken some sites off. What is the reasons for taking one off?
Every site has a reason. We would love to have never moved a site that went in 1992, 1993. But we've had, I would guess, maybe around a dozen that just over time, for one reason or another, maybe the landowner sold the land and the new landowner wanted to. I can think of one example where the new landowner wanted to grow a crop right where our site was, So there's that. There are a few instances also where over time, the land just grew up around the site too much. And a perfect location would be, as I mentioned, out in a pasture, kind of a ranch, maybe for cattle or something like that, where there's not a lot of trees and just kind of open grassland. That's where we can get the most representative data. If you've got it around a lot of trees or near urban areas or in a river valley, then it may not be as representative of the rest of the county. So we want something kind of open. So there are a number of places that over time just grew up too much and we didn't have control over that, and we were able to move them to a better spot also. And then we started with 107 sites, and we're now at 120, which is kind of we have a policy now that to add more, we really need to very carefully consider how it impacts our ability to calibrate the sensors and go out and maintain the sites and things like that. For about 5 or 6 years as we were growing, we said once we hit 120, that's when we need to start talking about, needing another technician and another truck to get out there and another, calibration chamber and things like that. And with each of those new sites, there were reasons. We put some in Oklahoma City for an Oklahoma City micronet project we were doing with a bond. We did some for the Water Resources Board to measure groundwater at Fitztown. And so each thing was kind of case by case. And the final one right now is we'd really like to get a site in Tulsa. In 20 years, we've never had one in Tulsa. And the reason is from the early days of the Mesonet, it was always meant to be a rural network, to be representative of the whole county. And so it was kind of a big deal, and I believe it was 2008 or so. We put some sites in Oklahoma City. We had never had any sites in Oklahoma City either, and we now have some sites in Oklahoma City, and we see how that's really paid off in terms of people being able to use the data. They want to look at the data from where they live. Of course, most people live in Oklahoma City or then Tulsa second, and so we're hoping to get one in Tulsa soon. It's been a challenge to find an open area in Tulsa. Everywhere in Tulsa is either very urban and developed or forested, and
Down by the river.
yeah, or close to the river where there could be some flooding issues or just some local effects from being in a river bottom. But we've got a location up there where we're working with, and hopefully we'll have a Tulsa site soon.
It's odd that in 20 years you haven't.
Right.
I'm surprised they haven't been knocking on your door.
They haven't. I'm sure there have been people knocking on the door, just maybe haven't been too upset with us, but over the years we've definitely heard requests to put more sites in that area. And we put one in Inola back maybe 8 or 10 years ago to help the Tulsa media kind of have a rural site a little bit closer to Tulsa. And it's still there, but nothing right in the heart of Tulsa.
Put it out the fairgrounds, that may not be at the center enough either.
We looked at the fairgrounds too. I can't remember the reasons, but we worked with the county educator and the emergency managers up there. There's a river forecast center in Tulsa and the weather service. We've been working with all of them to try to find a good spot, representative spot in Tulsa.
So maybe not new growth in sites, but new growth in uses.
Yes, definitely. That's exploiting the data is, I think, a big goal we have. Really, we have so much data that's coming in every 5 minutes, and there's so many people requesting the data from us and using our data, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, really, of what you could use the data for. We've got an incredible solar radiation data archive all the way since 1994, every 5 minutes of what the solar radiation is. And so we've been trying to maybe exploit that for the state in terms of understanding solar energy potential in the state. Not only, it's easy to say how much average sunlight you have, but we can tell you how frequently it changes 5 minutes to 5 minutes, or how variable it is from one day to the next, or what was a really cloudy year versus a really sunny year. We've got an archive of 20 years of that data that I hope we can use. We did that with our wind data about 10 years ago and developed these very detailed wind power maps for the state. Where our windiest, as a quality assurance meteorologist, over 10 years ago, every single monthly QA that I did, where I would average all the wind data to try to find wind sensors that were not working right, what was always the highest wind speed in the state? Weatherford.
Oh, that's where
And that's where now you can't drive through I-40 on Weatherford without seeing all the turbines there. And so the county level data really helped highlight and give the wind power developers the evidence they needed to say, yeah, if we put turbines here, this is about how much energy we can develop.
There's not a solar farm, is there?
No, not that I know of.
When you were talking about wind power, did they have to pay for that?
No,
the data.
Well, in working and developing those maps, we worked with them. There may have been a grant that some researchers got to develop it. I'm not sure, but the Mesonet data was key in developing those wind potential maps for the state.
Do you have very many college students come to gather data for their dissertations and thesis from here?
Yes, yeah, we try to keep track. It's hard, really hard to keep track, but there's always on the order of 5 to 10, theses or dissertations each year that are using the Mesonet data in some way or another. I know I did my master's thesis and my PhD dissertation using Mesonet data, and it's a great resource for that kind of.
I guess they don't necessarily have to ask you permission to use it.
Right. If they can, hopefully, if they have a really big data request, they'll typically come through us. and say, can you give me the entire year or the entire 10 years? And then we can kind of track it that way. But a lot of times they'll just come to our website. We want to make it easy for them to self-serve the data too. And in that case, we have no idea who's getting the data. And the legislature actually, since they fund us, they want us to charge fees for like non-Oklahoma users or for for-profits. So if it's, a state agency like the Water Resources Board or the Department of Transportation or the Geological Survey or something like that, definitely do everything. We give them free access, help any other state agency. And if it's a public citizen, if you were to call up and say, I had a car accident, I really need to know they're saying it wasn't raining, could you provide me data or, any kind of public use, you're growing a garden and you really want to know how often the soil temperature is this on this day, we'll do that for free to you. We want to serve the public. But if you're a for-profit company that's going to then resell our data, we charge fees. And because you can make money for sure off the detailed weather data. And especially if you're a company, from outside of Oklahoma. And when developers will come and they will say, can we buy 10 years of data? And so we have a fee schedule. It's affordable. And they're happy to buy. They didn't have to go install a sensor for 10 years. They can just ask us, we'll deliver the entire 10-year archive of wind data for a certain site and help them. So we charge fees for that also.
Provided on a CD or
any FTP
however
it, yeah. Typically, the CDs definitely were the way we did it for a long time, and now we can email it, put it on a website for them to download it, or something like that.
I don't imagine that the steering committee way back then envisioned selling their data quite like that.
Right.
Maybe they did. They thought of everything else, it seems.
Yeah, it wasn't clear until the legislature kind of encouraged that, because the state would like to invest in something and then see it kind of support itself, So we get, a small portion of our budget, I'd say, each year on the order of $50,000 to $60,000 from just user fees and people buying the data. And for instance, maybe you're at Penn State University and you want to do your dissertation using Mesonet data. Well, we say, write a grant. Make sure when you write your grant that you include our fees in it, And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time they'll say, well, I already got the grant. I didn't know I was going to need to include any fees. And we have ways to then say, okay, we'll give it to you, but promise us that if you write a next grant, you'll include the Mesonet in your grant proposal. So that's a way to try to get funding also. We'd like to keep supporting what we're doing.
Well, what do you envision for yourself in the next 10 years here? Or 20? Till retirement.
Till retirement.
Lots more exciting days, huh?
Yes. I think delivering the data is, something that's really evolving and so dynamic. I saw the picture on the internet a week or two ago from looking at when the last Pope was elected versus this one, and how now everybody's got their cameras and they're videotaping, and just in 5 years or 10 years, how much it's changed. Mm-hmm. Delivering the data, is going to keep evolving, how we can best serve it to people and make it useful to people. And the biggest goal for me personally is seeing it continue and evolve into a climate network. That's something I think definitely in the early days of the steering committee, they just wanted to see it get installed and keep maintained for a while. Now we're 20 years, another 10 years, we'll have 30 years of data, which 30 years is what a lot of climate statistics are based off of. It's just a historical 30-year normal is a common meteorological term. And so some feel that once we get to that 30 years, that will be really be able to check off that we're a climate network too, and we can actually monitor the climate and not just what happened last year or last spring or last February. And so maintaining the quality has got to be the top priority. We've got 20 years of great quality. If we mess that up in the next 10 years, the archive will, but if we can keep it high quality, there will be nowhere else in the world they'll have a mesoscale climate network, and you'll be able to track things in Oklahoma that you can't anywhere else in the world, looking at them over 30 years, and we know that climate change is very local in nature. We can see very, very dramatic effects in the poles and in place of the coasts and things like that. Oklahoma doesn't always give you a really, really slap in the face signal of that change. But once we develop 30, 40 years and you can really see how climate change is being measured and the subtle things, because you need a long time record for that, that's going to make this data set really priceless.
You'll be here to see.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You really didn't expect to be sitting here when you were doing your science project?
Never.
Well,
No.
What had you hoped if you were thinking ahead?
I never even dreamed that something like this would happen.
You weren't planning to be a TV weather guy?
No, I was planning to be a weather service forecaster. And that's pretty much, at that time, it was either you worked for the government and the weather service doing like the behind the scenes, actually putting out the forecast, or you're the broadcaster on TV. And so that was the plan actually all through, part of college. That was just where the jobs were. And I was just lucky that paths crossed with the Mesonet doing this, and never dreamed that, well, I don't think anyone dreamed that the Mesonet would be where we are today, and be as successful as we are. And it was, we owe it to people like Dr. Crawford, Dr. Elliott, Dr. Brock, who really had just such a good plan, stable foundation of what they wanted to do. And it was hard. Even today when networks get developed, they don't think about the things that those guys thought about 20 years ago.
It's amazing, yes.
And they had, very high standards. And, so I wouldn't have dreamed how successful it would be and how all the great new things that we can do also.
Do your Texas family call and say, okay, the weather's up there this way, what's it doing here?
Yeah. It's so different. From state to state, it can be blizzard here in Norman and in the 80s where my family is in Texas. So, they've learned over the last 20 years that there's almost, unless it's a big cold front in the winter, and they're really hoping it's going to make it all the way down there. But it's quite different. And they just assume that whatever's happening down there, it's completely different here in Oklahoma. Whereas a lot of times it's almost the same, but there can be a lot of variability. And I'd love for Texas to get a Mesonet someday. That would be a big challenge. It's, 3, 4, 5, 6 times as large as Oklahoma. I know we have 77 counties and they have probably hundreds. And they've tried, and we've worked with Texas for over a decade trying to develop proposals to get a Texas Mesonet, but it's just a very big challenge down there. It takes so much upfront equipment too, if you were to instrument the whole state. And they've been successful in West Texas. They have a West Texas Mesonet that we've worked closely with. around Lubbock and Amarillo and down a little further south. So they're developing that way.
Not the big cities.
But not in the big cities. It's just in the western part of the state. And it's good for Oklahomans because if it fills in more, most of our weather comes from the west, and we only have the panhandle, that little strip to show us. But if they can develop the whole panhandle, that would be great for Oklahoma too.
Does Kansas not?
Other states generally have a mixture of airport stations, which are FAA, National Weather Service stations at the airports, and then maybe they have various other agricultural networks, but almost never is it the entire state in all one unified network together. It's generally different agencies or different groups that have different sites spread out across the state.
That's what helps make this unique.
Yes, definitely.
The number of sites and the how often you take measures.
Right, and that they're all standardized and they're all identical.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all at 10 meters tall, and it's not you've got one with this sensor and one at this height and one doing this different thing and one doing that different thing, and this site reports once a week and this one reports once a day, and we're very fortunate that we were able to design and implement it very standard the same way across the whole state.
And had the legislature to support it.
Yes.
That was the other
Governor Bellman, which Dr. Ron Elliott may have mentioned to you, he was key in getting that initial funding after several years of trying to get proposals and not getting funded. It was Governor Bellman who gave that initial funding.
Well, he was always one to get the universities to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Plus being a farmer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he always thought ahead.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add that I haven't asked you about? We've covered most of what's on my list.
Okay, no, I can't think of anything.
Favorite part of the job? Your favorite part of the job?
Favorite part of the job?
And then we'll close with that.
Oh gosh, there's so many.
That's good.
Least I'm
favorite.
Very lucky. Then. I'm very lucky.
It can be all of it. Do you have a least favorite then, if you can't think of it?
The least favorite is managing people, paper pushing, all the sea of paperwork and everything to, so that's definitely the least favorite. My favorite part of the job is just getting to come in and sit down at the computer and see what's happening all across the state. I mean, it is really a meteorologist's dream to get to see live, data coming in. And we have such talented software developers that make the visualization of our data so easy to use. And so getting to come to work and knowing that a front's coming through or there's a chance of severe storms or, whatever, and knowing that I'm going to be able to see that instantly as our stations report it, and getting to, know that you were a part of making that happen and see it come up, and then see the thousands of people hitting the website instantaneously to look at it, and then see on Facebook that someone shared a map, and then somebody else has shared it 25 times, and that's my favorite part.
Social networks do well.
Yeah.
You'll be excited then tomorrow night. I think we're supposed to have a storm come through.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with me.
No problem. Thank you.